Okay, perfect. Again, welcome everybody to our first alumni speaker series. Today we have Reilly Brooks with us, and so I'll go ahead and give Reilly an introduction. She's the executive director of Schoolyard Ventures, a design thinking lab for teens to launch and lead social ventures around the world. Before joining Schoolyard Ventures, Reilly directed youth programming at Ashoka, the global pioneers of social entrepreneurship, where her team partnered with major companies to invest and amplify youth-led innovation across the United States. And earlier in her career, Reilly worked with community development organizations focused on youth empowerment in Texas, Kenya, and Nepal. So, a real global citizen with us today. She holds a degree from Rice University, and she also serves as an advisory board member with the CCL. So she's going to be talking to us a bit about how do we foster our civic sense of purpose and network after graduating from Rice, and how they can look like it in many different ways, and how they can transform as the years goes on. But I'll open the door for you, Reilly.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. Awesome. So I have a few different things for us today. It's a smaller group, so I have visuals. I'm not here to like fully present, but I am a natural storyteller. So anytime you have questions, we want to chat, full group, totally down. But professionally, I do constantly host and work with young people and run workshops and lead sessions. So I came prepared to visually share. But again, my name's Reilly. I'm the executive director of Schoolyard Ventures. We're a design thinking lab for teens. And my whole job, career, and purpose is to help young people launch and lead social ventures in the world to really unlock their potential, learn adaptive thinking, practice innovation in the real world, and find their power. And so I'm here today to tell you a little bit of my career, what I've done, and I want to share kind of lessons I've learned in the field doing some different things and how I've connected a lot of my work from university into what I do today. So Schoolyard Ventures, we partner with some of the world's top universities to offer rigorous college level entrepreneurship programming to ambitious high school students. And so I have a really cool insight in both at the college and high school level of what we're getting teens to work on. Again, as Chris shared before this, I've surveyed a bunch of the social impact field over the past 10 years. So I've worked in small nonprofits domestically and internationally. I've worked in philanthropy and grant making organizations. I worked at international NGOs doing systems level work and worked on programs in partnership with major companies for their CSR initiatives or their corporate social responsibility. And then now I run a social enterprise all about youth entrepreneurship, but a thread across every organization, group of people, market I've worked with is all about youth empowerment and student-led entrepreneurship. And so that's what I want to share a little bit about today and how I found my niche in this space and some life lessons I've kind of discovered along the way. But to get it started, I want to do a little bit of a challenge. So I want you to grab a piece of paper or your iPad or a notebook or whatever, and I want you to draw 9 dots. They're 3 by 3. So your challenge, yeah, go grab a piece of paper, pull out your iPad, your ThinkPad, whatever it is. And what I want you to do is draw these 9 dots in a 3 by 3 pattern. It can be big or small, full circle, totally up to you. Your challenge is to connect all 9 dots with only 4 straight lines. You can't lift your pen off the paper. So if you're doing this on like even on your with your finger and like kind of a draw pad, you can't lift your pen. You can't lift your finger, but you have to connect all 9 dots. They have to be straight lines. The lines can intersect and they can cross, no curves. So try to connect all 9 dots with only 4 straight lines without lifting your pen or your finger off the paper. I'll give everyone like a minute to try to solve this puzzle. Welcome to anyone that just joined. What we're doing is we're just spending a minute connecting these 9 dots with only 4 straight lines. So if you have a piece of paper, a pen, you want to do this on your phone, the goal is to connect all 9 dots with only 4 straight lines. The dots have to be straight. You can't not retrace, and they cannot curve. Awesome. Okay, we've spent like a minute. Does anyone think they've solved the puzzle?
Yes, but I've seen this before.
Okay, you have? Okay, great. No, go for it. So, Bria, how would you solve this problem?
The trick to it is like literally thinking outside of the box of dots. I didn't have a piece of paper, so I ended up
Yeah,
drawing it on my phone. I can hold it up to my screen.
yeah.
It literally, you have to like, it's like an arrow that extends out of the grid.
I love it. Thank you, Bria, for doing it and for solving the problem. So I've done this with lots of groups of teens in particular who love a puzzle like this because they hate to be wrong. And there's technically, because I've dealt with two physics teachers about this, three ways to formally solve the puzzle. And I'm not going to get into two because it will make my brain explode a little. But the most common way is the way Bria and I just did it, which is you go across, down, over, and through. Right. So this is an easy way for me to be like, oh, entrepreneurship's all about thinking outside the box and being creative and blah, blah, blah. And that would just be like a cheap shot. Instead, I use this example to explain two fundamental principles of anything in social impact and entrepreneurship, which is about real and imaginary constraints. So I give you some real constraints. I only gave you a minute. You're doing this really quickly on your phone or your piece of paper in front of you. You had four lines instead of five. They couldn't be curved, right? There was a lot of ways to solve this problem, but I gave you some real legitimate constraints in the world. What happens with any social issue we see or any problem in the world we come across is that we start putting imaginary constraints on that problem when we're faced with real constraints. And so part of the job of being a change maker, an innovator, an entrepreneur, a civic leader is to be separating what is a real constraint to solving this problem in our world and what is an imaginary one. Because what ends up stopping a lot of people from taking action is they think there's just too many parts of the problem or it's too overwhelming or there's not enough of this. You hear a lot of like what there isn't, when in reality, our key job is to figure out what is a real barrier I'm against, what is being perceived, misunderstood, what's an assumption I'm making that I haven't even tested because I haven't thought, like I haven't tried it. And that's what we have to do is to start separating these two things out. And that's where real innovation, entrepreneurship, civic engagement lies in my perspective, is separating real from imaginary constraints and learning how to solve real problems in the world while navigating the real constraints in the world. Because we can't solve for anything, but we can solve problems. We know it's possible. And so I want to share a story of one of my civic engagement experiences that actually started when I was a sophomore in college. So my sophomore year, I did the Lone Stern Fellowship, and I went to a rural community in Western Kenya called Chavakali. Chavakali is a really unique place in the world in the sense that it was a community about 10,000 people over lots of miles, very rural, mostly farming. Both my host parents were both teachers, and I worked particularly in this rural community library that you can see right here. And when you just even look at our little library, there's a lot of real constraints you can already start putting on this, right? Not a lot of space. To the right side, and I know this is recorded, to the right side was a brothel, and on the left side was a bar. And so if you're trying to have a community library in a city, it is hard to have that when you have two physical obstacles in your way to having young kids safely in that space. But there were lots of opportunities in this library. It did have resources. It had a really strong presence of people who came, and lots of people really loved the space. And so, what we had to really do is figure out, like, okay, what does this library have? What are we capable of? And what are the challenges facing it? Right? Because when you look at pictures like this, you're like, this library has a lot going on. And this was all it is. It's literally just this room, some shelves, and some books. Most of the books were donated by this nonprofit in the US where it was like kind of a community like action group or whatever, where people just raised money, collected books, and sent them in, which was great. They got books in, they got real titles, they got lots of stories, a lot of English stories, because that's where the education system was mostly in English. And so kids needed to read and write in English anyway, which was awesome. But a lot of the stories were super inaccessible. They talked about characters and people that didn't look like them, situations that the kids couldn't even relate to, didn't have like on right reading levels for some people. And by nature of who donates books, there's really only kids' books. So the library was supposed to be for all ages, but we really only had books for kids. And so what would happen is a lot of people would even just stop reading because there's only, right, so long as an adult you want to read a chapter book or like a little picture book with images for young people. And so part of our job initially at the library was to separate the real and imaginary constraints. So we had some real constraints. We had a limited quantity and quality of books. There was a lack of culturally relevant books. We had limited access to reading materials at home and at school. And there were no books in native languages or even Swahili or Kiswahili. and there wasn't much time to read during the school day. The reason this community library was put together in the first place is because there was 10 local elementary and primary schools nearby. The issue was anytime they had resources in their own buildings, they would get stolen and sold over the river or over rivers and lakes to other countries and places because they could fetch more money. And so instead, what the community did is they pooled all their resources together, created one library where all the resources, technology, computers, iPads could live and pay for security in one building. That way, they're not spreading out resources and being really clever with where do they protect everything for them. But that means what the libraries was responsible for was going out to these students, bringing these books, sharing the stories. And so there was just limited time to read when we can only go to one school at a time with our motorbikes and backpacks full of books. So there's a lot of constraints facing this library. But there were some imaginary constraints that started coming up the more we talked to principals, parents, and young people. One is that a lot of people just assumed the library was empty often because people didn't even like reading. It was homework, it was a chore, they could be playing soccer, being outside. Like, why would you just want to be inside reading a book when they were already at school all day? And that children should only read in English. That was a really big constraint that ended up being imaginary that we were up against. That a lot of people thought, English is the language of our education system, of our business. That's all they can be learning in. But that was a huge issue because a lot of kids weren't even learning how to read in their native tongue or the first language they learned. Therefore, it was almost nearly impossible intellectually to learn how to read in a different language because they didn't master it in the first language they knew. And so that transition from reading to learn, learning to read to reading to learn was really tricky when your native tongue was different than the books you're reading in fifth, sixth, seventh grade. And so part of what we were doing that summer was we were implementing this really cool initiative. It was sponsored by World Reader, and they donated 60 Kindles with all these really cool ebooks. Like they were just relevant books from East African and Kenyan authors. They had games in them for deeper learning. There was vocabulary words. They were really intentionally designed, and we got the shipment of them. And we had to figure out, like, okay, we only have 60 of them. We have 10 schools, which means we had access to 6,000 kids that were supposed to access this resource every single week. But not all 6,000 kids are going to come to our little library. And so what we had to do is figure out a really clever way to get these e-readers and Kindles and stories out to real people. And so what we ended up doing is creating this like community, like mobile library system where we would go around and host before school, during school, and after school reading sessions. We'd go drop off 20 Kindles, create an activity, challenge people to do it, drive the motorbike another 30 minutes, go to another school, give a different set of resources, go back to a school, take that. And we created basically this network where we were constantly picking up, dropping off, setting up an activity, a reading group, circles where kids would just go outside, play, and read together. And it was a really cool way to get more people reading. And we really had to leverage the before and after school reading hours because we weren't just able to get to every school every day when school was like 6 hours long. And we'd end up keeping all the Kindles in one place, being able to charge them there, have Wi-Fi, concentrate the resources of what it costs to maintain this. And it was great because it reduced the fear of losing them. Everyone knew where the books were, and everyone was really excited when we would show up and be energized and enthused to read. And so this was really cool. This was back in 2016. So it was literally 10 years ago, which is kind of crazy to think about. And it was meaningful. It was a great initiative for the community. But my summer ended and I left. And unfortunately, this model only worked when there were two physical humans able to do it because you needed two people on two different motorbikes to be running and driving around all this equipment. And so the idea kind of died. I kept in touch with Kelvin, who ran the library. He wasn't able to sustain it in the same way. He did it at a smaller scale. It did bring more people to the library. More people were excited to come play with the Kindles. It got people knowing what resources exist in their community, and they really loved that. But I sat with that for a long time because I really thought I solved a problem, but in reality, I just kind of solved it. I didn't sustain it. It didn't keep going. And it felt like this really cool passion project that I get to tell other people about and look really professionally impressive of that I did this a meaningful civic engagement in my community, but it didn't actually radically change any lives. And so I thought about that for 5 years, and it was really bugging me. It was bugging me that it was a project that really served me and not other people. It was bugging me that it was a community that still needed so much and I could give more, but I was choosing not to. And it bugged me that I could keep going with my life, but the problem still existed. And so 5 years later, I was working at this nonprofit, Ashoka, and we were working on telling stories of what young changemaking looks like in action all around the world. It was deep COVID we were just about to get into, and we were really trying to figure out, like, okay, like what kind of story should we tell? Where would we even tell them? who would we do this for? But a donor basically gave us money to write stories, but we had like no distribution, didn't know what. What happened was, pardon me thinking of who I knew, is I remembered World Reader. And I thought, what if they were a cool organization to work with and leverage the materials, the network, the resources they have? Because I know they have books in the hands of kids, but are they even reading these kind of stories? And so, what we ended up doing with World Reader is we started writing down our real constraints that we wanted to create stories about young people creating change in their communities in culturally relevant ways and different languages and getting in front of a lot of these kids where the books and resources were already out there, but they could download even more cool content. And we saw that many of the funded projects were focused on stories that were unattainable or unrelatable. So when we went through World Reader's catalog, a lot of it was like a personal narrative of MLK or Obama or like, right, like cool people. They were like, yeah, they're all like Bill Gates. You're like, yeah, that's an awesome person. But if you're talking about a kid in rural Indonesia, like that's not an accessible story. Like it's a fun story, but it's not what's going to get them out of bed and be like, I want to be a change maker. Like I want to create change. It's going to say like, I can't be that. And so that was a big challenge we faced. Another one was that we had limited time and lots of priorities. This was a really small grant that this donor thought was like this huge revolutionary thing, but in reality, it was just a drop in the bucket. And we didn't have that much startup funding to begin with to spend time and energy on this. But there were some imaginary constraints. One was that people made this assumption that, like, well, stories of like everyday kids in the world solving problems aren't going to attract people because they're just not interesting to tell. And that two is no one's going to keep funding this. Like, this is just going to be like a lame idea. It's not going to work. And so, what we had to do is really figure out which of these are real and which of these are like not real. And so what we did learn is that our imaginary constraints were pretty false. Like they weren't real because what we ended up doing was we ended up finding kids around the world who were creating real social change through our network at Ashoka. We were already running youth programs. We had young people we were working with. And so we found a girl in rural Western Kenya, a girl in Indonesia, someone in Egypt, someone in South Asia or South India, and then a kid in Rio de Janeiro. And we interviewed them to tell their stories. They were already doing programs with us. They were doing these really cool community initiatives. And we thought, what if we could just turn their story into a little children's book, put it in some different languages, populate it on the World Reader platform, and see if people like it? It was lots of iteration and testing. We tested it with real families. We got different people to translate it. We spent all this time and energy prototyping, testing, rapidly experiencing it, and figuring out what people needed and wanted. From my experience working in the rural community library, what I was able to do is really figure out how this would even be implemented. So teachers needed activities. There needed to be vocab words that linked to definitions. We needed it to be a certain amount of minutes or time, so it was really easy to fit in a lesson and for kids to popcorn read in the narrative. And so because of my experience in the community, I was able to really figure out how this would actually be implemented in a classroom or nonprofit setting. And so we ended up doing lots of testing. Digital was a really cheap way to do it. People kept saying, oh, you need to make the books physical. You need to make books physical. But we already knew World Reader had thousands of Kindles, millions all over the world. We populated them on the platform. They did a media campaign to get people to download them. And in 1 year, we had 1 million people reading the entire storybook collection in their programming, their local libraries, their local schools, in developing countries and communities all around the world. And it was awesome. It felt like I was a way to able to give back to a community library that meant so much to me, where students 5 years later were able to read stories that I was helping write, curate, and put together for them to see more stories of young people creating change. But what happened is the classic nonprofit thing where the money ran out. So a real constraint ended up being, sure, people love these individual stories of everyday changemakers, but donors still really just wanted to fund the sexy stories that were heroic and adults and not of teens. And so we lost momentum. I moved on, but I realized that sustainability in my ideas as a leader and someone who's trying to solve real problems in this world doesn't stop if I just lose funding. Instead, what might happen is my friend Ara, who is one of the books is featured, is about. She's now a young adult. She runs an organization. She does really cool work in the world. She loved this project. She thought it was so cool. And she loved the stories of real kids reading the books. And she wanted to replicate it. So what she did is she took the model of what we created, wrote 20 storybooks of young change makers in Indonesia, translated them to different local languages in Bahasa Indonesian and other sub-languages, and then ended up creating this series that schools could read and use. And she had a model that worked in the US and from our organization and implemented it in Indonesia. In the first month, She ended up selling, so they got money to be able to fund this further, 6,500 books, and then reaching 170,000 students because the school district that bought it implemented it into the core curriculum of reading in elementary school. They had then created an online version that's accessible across every school in Indonesia and was being adopted to be part of the core curriculum. They ended up translating it in different languages for different countries that we're interested in. So schools in Singapore, India, Japan loved this idea and wanted the stories in their collection so they could spread it to other people. And now they're available in 23 languages, and it's a fully funded venture where people are paid and writing stories and producing work about young people creating change. And so what I love about this story and why I share it in such long form is because I think it tackles some really common myths of what it means to be a social innovator, a social entrepreneur, a civic leader. Is the first is that all innovation is social innovation. The second is you have to be everything for everyone. And the third is that only big, complex ideas change the world. The more I'm in spaces innovating, creating, solving problems, the more I have learned that committing to this work and being in the social impact sector means you're constantly solving a real problem. You're not just making things. Lots of people, especially when we throw around the word entrepreneurship, are just making things. But a plan is not progress, and a solved on paper is not a solved problem. And so innovation has to have implementation. And so solving it implies like there's actually a resolution. We're really doing something. The second is that scale isn't necessarily always about you scaling from 100 to 1,000 to a million people. Scaling can be about making a model that's replicable in other communities. It can mean the sustainability of an idea that goes to other people. It can mean deepening your impact within a community versus just touching more and more people over a wide breadth. And then third is that hyper-specific niche and everyday problems have hyper-specific niche and everyday solutions that actually matter and can change communities. We're always seeking in this space like a big idea, or I need to change all this in policy, or I have to like be at this cutting edge nonprofit that's doing everything of the issue. But in reality, the more spaces I've been in as a civic leader and a social entrepreneur, the more I realize is that the more niche you get, the more specific and the more everyday is actually the more meaningful problems to solve. Even if it doesn't feel like the sexiest thing to be doing or the most cutting edge, it's what's going to be most viable and sustainable to change lives. And so if I were someone zooming out and thinking about my own career, which I think about all the time and the journey I'm on, is I kind of ask myself the central question. Instead of seeking out an answer, I think in social innovation and entrepreneurship, you have to seek out and lead with a question. And so the question I always frame when I think about my career and other people's careers is what would it look like to do blank where blank exists? Like, what am I striving towards? Because I think what happens a lot in entrepreneurship is we like start thinking about the solution, or like, I want to be the leader of this thing. And we think about what we want and what we need. And like, I in that experience versus like, what's our mission statement? But could we put that in the form of a question that we're constantly curious about, we're constantly seeking out, we're constantly trying to solve problems in? And so that's how I frame my journey in civic leadership in my professional life and my personal life. And for me, the question I'm trying to explore, and I've explored the past 10 years, and I plan on doing the next decade in, is what would it look like to live in a world where every teen felt powerful to create change? Like that's the central question and thesis that's a central question I'm asking. And I have lots of theses that I'm like exploring and going after and testing every day. But this is the central question that's driving the decisions I make, the pivots I make, and who I'm working with and what problems I'm trying to solve. And so my best advice for anyone in this space is to not necessarily think about, like we always say, like career goals, but what's been so helpful for me is to reposition it as a question of something I'm trying to strive for and lead with curiosity and seek answers to understand better and be a part of. I know I just shared a lot. I talked a lot. I have more stories I can tell. I have less stories I can tell. But I wanted to open it up for the floor in case there's any questions for me and my journey, things I've shared. If not, I have more stories I can share about entrepreneurship and innovation and civic leadership on the ground, but wanted to pause there real quick.
I have a question if that's
Yeah,
okay.
of
Um,
course.
yeah, thank you so much for your talk so far. It's been really enlightening. I am coming from a place where like I'm in grad school to go to work in the nonprofit sector.
Yeah.
And we never use the term social and like social impact sector. I've like never heard that before this. So it was really great to hear like your work and like the mission behind it. And one thing that it made me think about is like this idea in nonprofits where there's not necessarily the funding or the resources to address a deeper issue
Mhm.
or to solve the problem at its core or its root, and therefore resources that like a nonprofit does have goes to kind of like a band-aid to addressing the problem as it arises. And I'm wondering if you have any reflections on like what it means to um, like solve those issues within um, I don't know, within I guess the real constraints or trying to think outside of the box in order to turn real constraints imaginary.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. I So yeah, so I love what you're calling. So yeah, I've reframed how I describe this industry as a social impact sector because I think it allows for more breadth of like public and private philanthropy, social entrepreneurship, civic engagement, like both politically adjacent, non-politically adjacent, or like politically absent and nonprofits. Because I think we've created a bifurcation in the nonprofit world where there's like nonprofits and for-profits, and nonprofit means they're good and for-profit means bad. And then nonprofit means you don't have money and for-profit means you have money. And I think when I learned that there were so many different types of social enterprise models out there and different ways to think about it and different ways people need to solve problems, I was like, oh, we're putting a lot of assumptions on like a lot of things that aren't true. And so that was another like imaginary constraint. I think so. My beef with the nonprofit world that I will say over and over again is we lead with deficit, which is so funny because it's an asset orient like positive oriented people, optimistic people, people who want to do things, but they lead with a deficit framing of we don't have enough money, we don't have enough staff, we don't have enough buy-in, we don't have enough support, we don't have enough this. And sometimes it's objectively true. Like, yes, you need more money, you need more this. But so does everyone. Like everything always could do it. And money doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And I think because the second we see problems get an influx of money, the problem still isn't solved, right? Like, are there still things where you're like, wait, wasn't there that huge $20 million donation to that organization and it like tripled their budget? And then the problem still kind of exists around this thing. Like we've seen it over and over again in like little news studies and cases. And when a nonprofit gets an influx of cash that they're not ready to even manage or take on, but then you're like, but wasn't that your big problem? And I think staffing is the next one that comes up. Anytime you're at a nonprofit, everyone's like, we need more people, we need more people. And the more I've had to get scrappier solving problems, I've realized it's not necessarily more of something, it's doing something better or in a different way or reimagining existing resources. And then eventually need to add to that resource pool and add to the things you're doing. But most things can start by being really scrappy and low resource to validate that it works. And I think one of my one of my things of how I've rewritten my relationship to like donors or investors or people like I need to leverage capital, cash, resources from is I need social proof of the thing working. Like I get why people need to see the thing like actually could actually solve the problem, and then that's something worth funding, it's worth being a part of, it's worth doing. um and I think what the challenge the nonprofits have in general is that they're seeking funding in order to seek permission to do the thing. So in the meantime they're doing the band-aid short-term quick solution because that's where they got the money or that's where they can make momentum or that's where they can quickly prove impact, because they're also struggling with like some of this is a long game, like how do I prove impact on something that we're taking a bet on? And they need to do two things. One is they need to be better at like addressing that it's a hypothesis. Like most innovation and like social change we're trying to see in systems work we're trying to do is a hypothesis that if we can do that, the thing will be better. And it's a long game that we're trying to test. And then two is have leaders that are willing to back up that hypothesis. Like when people shy away and they're like, well, we don't know. And like, I don't know if this thing's going to work. And well, we're taking it like, yeah, you're taking a bet, you're taking a risk. And part of it is like, are you taking a smart risk? And how you can best do that is by leading with humility and not knowing that you don't know everything about the problem, leading with curiosity to go seek out the answers, and finding the right combination of what does the world need? What are you and your team really good at? And what do other people value? And if you can like put that thread together, we're sure, like, um, you know, if you find a donor who like made their wealth or the family wealth is made off of like, um, let's say, I'm trying to think, like they're made off of oil and gas, like okay, where are those family from? What are issues they care about? What are things that you're also really good at? What are ways we can sync this up? Like, are we even finding the right people? I think nonprofits try like shoot in the dark a lot of like, maybe they'll fund this, maybe they'll fund this. And I think it has to be this really strategic effort of showing social proof, leading with like, yeah, we're making some like we're taking some bets, we're making some hypothesis. Here's proof of why we think we're right. And like, are you willing to bet with us? And reframe deficits as just like the resources you currently have and what you think you need to like get to the next level. And so I do think it's a lot more, I don't know if that helps answer your question, but I think getting out of the mindset of deficit thinking is really, really important, especially when you're trying to get into the nonprofit space, because that's what's also going to make you stand out in front of leadership because they get that. Like good leaders are people who are like, everyone needs to stop complaining about what we don't have. Like, let's focus on what we do. And when they see people who are like, wait, you see the opportunity. Yeah, like come on, like let's lean into the opportunity, not necessarily let's focus on the deficit. I don't know if that helps. That's a
No,
lot of that, but
I think it was really helpful and very inspiring. And thank you for your answer. Yeah.
yeah, of course. I see a question in the channel of what would you have any advice for trying to exercise leadership in institutions that frowns upon new ideas? Great question. One is to just do it. Like, I don't know. I'm just very pro, like, just do the thing. Like, who freaking cares? And if they don't like it, like, someone else will. Like, one is, and I hate to be like, not to question your current employer, what you're doing, but always at, like, it's so cliche, but like, ask for forgiveness versus permission. Because if things really work, a CEO, a director, a person's going to be like, yeah, that was my employee. That was my idea. Like, this is the thing. If there's someone who it works or was a risk worth taking and there's like great learning and they don't value it, my question to you would be like, then why are you there? Like there are other people who value risk takers and people who are willing to try and innovate. Um, and part of it, and then the third part though is understand is like figuring out with them again, what are their real and imaginary constraints? Are they afraid of the budget implications? Are they making fake assumptions of like what this could lead to? Do they think this is going to distract you from the main thing? Like a lot of times people say no because they're hesitant of like what could go wrong but not thinking about what could go right. And so if you could understand what's preventing them from realizing like the opportunity costs of not trying, to me that's it. But my other, I don't know, I'm a little like just do it. Like and if you're not around people who don't do it, like then go to find new people. Like there are people who want to build like, build with people, cool people. Um but that would be my advice. And then and also the fourth piece to that is if it feels really risky, you're having to kind of do it in the shadows. Like this storybook project I shared, I was doing on like Friday nights and like committing free time to and like begging friends to translate for me that spoke Hindi. Like I was just asking and pulling for favors because I really believed in it and I thought it was a smart bet. And then once we hit 10,000 readers, I got both CEOs' attention and they're like, "Yeah, let's go all in on this." And then we were able to amplify it to 1 million. And so once I was able to prove like I really think this works, this is aligned with what you're trying to do. It's aligned with what I want to grow into. Like I'm starting to line up the pieces. Here's social proof. Help me get it out there more. And then they eat it up and they've like written it on their impact work. And I'm like, yeah, great. Like, who cares? Like, wonderful. Like, let's keep going. Cause I've now satisfied a mission you have. Um, and like part of your strategic plan. So that's how I would see it as like, what's the smallest version of the idea you could test quietly and quickly and just see if there's any validity to it. And then if that works, it's easy to then say like, hey, this worked at this classroom, this worked at this school, or this worked with this organization. Like, I think we could keep doing it. And it does take grit and it does take you having to be resourceful. And it does take going out of your way to do something. But if you really believe in the idea, it's worth testing. I see another question is, are there real constraints that are constant throughout social issues? Have those real constraints ever transformed into imaginary constraints somehow? Yeah, I think most, that's a good question. We probably need like a history professor in here to like, or like in a sociologist to like compare like our understanding of like what is true and not true in the world. Um, but I think a lot about something I do when I'm trying to understand constraints in the world is I'll go like watch YouTube videos of social movements because there was once a time we like believed certain people couldn't read or like certain people couldn't vote or certain people didn't have this right. Like we like there was a truth, like some objective truth we all once thought, or the people in power once thought was true. And then we were like, that's crazy. Why would we do that? No, this is what's true. And so our understanding of so many things that are true has changed. Um, and so I think it's cool to look and learn from interesting social movements because my opinion's the same of like, I think change making is a form of literacy. And I think everyone should have access to learning how to create change in the world. And I think it's crazy that it's not the leading thing because I think it's as fundamental as reading and writing is how to be innovative, adaptive, resourceful, gritty in order to survive. And thrive. And so to me, it's like that to me is like the next is like a fundamental right everyone needs in this world is like human agency. But that's not like there's a lot of imaginary constraints on why that's not true or why that's not a thing. And so that to me is what I would be doing is like in your industry, in your sector, I would literally look at like what are some things that were like misunderstood, misdone, people not included in something, an inequity that like once was and now isn't, or we've changed the narrative on it. And that can help you understand too, like the models of how people think. Um, and then another question is, does sustainable solutions to social impact always have to start with money? No, I think the best solutions started with no money. It's kind of like, I know, like, I feel like producers and authors say that all the time. Like, their best book was the one they like, wrote on their commute, or the best like movie they made is the one they had no budget and funding. Like, because I think lack of resources encourages you to take advantage of every opportunity possible to you. And I think money and resources actually cushion you a little too much where it's hard to be gritty because you have such a like we seek comfort, and if there's space for comfort, you like don't feel the discomfort of innovation. And I think that discomfort and stretching yourself with limited resources is actually where most cool innovation in the world happens. Um, and I think that's most telling when you like visit a developing country or you go into a community where there's very few resources and you see something and you're like, holy shit, how did they build this? Like, how do they have, like, I studied abroad in Nepal and I've visited several times. The highest ranked school in Nepal is in a squatter community, which squatters are people who illegally reside on the land that they live on. They've built this community over 30 years. No one has legal rights to the community. It's very controversial. But people like believe in the claim of their land, even though the government hasn't like given them rights. And if you're a squatter in Nepal, most of the time you don't have citizenship, you don't have land rights, and you can't like you don't have a passport or ID. But the highest performing school in the country is in a squatter community because they figured out how to leverage everyone's talent, everyone's purpose, everyone's potential to invest in the kids in the community. And they have the best grades, the best ranks, go to the best colleges. And now the problem is like, how do they get visas and passports to be able to leave and like get citizenship to go? And so their brightest, biggest talent doesn't have rights to the own country they live in. And so to me, I always think about that of like, when you find those examples, you're like, how, like, wait, they did this, we can do it elsewhere. And I think it's because like less resources makes you, and if you're resilient, makes you really scrappy and makes you solve problems in meaningful ways. So no, I think some of the most sustainable solutions start with no money. And then once you prove it's not just an idea, but a viable solution, that's when money starts coming in with the right donors or support because people believe in things that scale, like believe in things that work and want to fund things that actually work. And then another question Satana had was, what do you think about the development of AI in the nonprofit world and targeting a lot of deficiencies you're talking about? Yeah, I think I don't know a lot about Anthropic's Claude Corpse. That's like I have to look, I've heard about it lately, but I have to look more into it. I I think so. I currently don't work at a nonprofit. I lead a social enterprise where I'm constantly thinking about AI. Um, because I'm dealing with teens who are really curious and interested and want to learn about AI, but are being dissuaded not to. And I think anytime young people are told not to do something, they want to do it more and they don't really care who tells them what to do. Like, and so it's like, how could you harness that like rebellion, like make them positive rebels, like good rebels, right? Like if they're going to play around on Claude Code, why can't they learn how to like code a gaming app that teaches kids like how to be a better like how to not bully, right? Like why can't you just repopulate it to an issue where they're like, oh, this is really fun. And so what we do a lot of work in is working with students to reimagine their own relationship with AI, to both see any technology is just a tool for social change. Technology itself is not a solution, it is a tool to create solutions. And two, just like AI is one way you can create change and you can harness it for both good and bad. And I think the more you expose young people to experimenting and playing around at a small scale, like how could you harness it for good things? Like that only incites you. One, it puts them at the cutting edge of new emerging technology. And two, it helps them engage with the technology with like such deep purpose because they're like, wait, this is so much potential. I can go with it. And so I'm really curious about AI. I don't have like I have like educational perspectives on it because I work with teens in this space. But I don't think we should shy away from new things in the world. I think that's like where we fall behind is if we shy away from new things versus learning how to engage with things ethically, creatively, and with good intention to understand like what it could do for us.
Thank you, Riley. I
Yeah.
had a question for you.
Yeah.
In the meantime, while others think about their questions and type them out or speak up. So I thought it was really compelling in one of your stories. You talked about an imagined constraint being that stories don't really, or students don't really want to read stories about local change makers and actually leverage that to be the center and like focal point of the initiative. What is like the process in going about that in terms of not just eliminating imagined constraints, but kind of actually rethinking them and seeing them more as an asset to actually maybe be the foundation of a new idea or something like that?
Yeah. So that's when we tested. Like we put and I think that's what you have to do with any imaginary constraint is like actually just like be like go back to like ninth grade science and run a little science experiment where we gave kids books of adult change makers or like people you would think of as a leader and then like some of the teen stories and saw which ones they liked and gravitated towards and like read them and like gave feedback. And teens liked reading about other teens. And they especially like reading about teens. They're like, wait, this isn't my native language. Or like, wait, this thing, like they liked something about it. Um, and so part of it too, I think that my other piece to that and why I felt really confident about stories of people is because I had deep exposure to the market and the problem. I think when you're trying to solve any problem in the world from any like whether you're a researcher, you're a nonprofit worker, you're a social worker, you're at a cool startup, is like you have to become the expert at the problem before you're the expert in the solution. And the more you can be really, really good at, even if you're like, I haven't figured out how to solve this problem, but I know everything about it. I know how it affects people. I know stakeholders. I know this. Like, that's where you're end up going to create value and realize like what are the myths behind it. So to me, it's like actually testing assumptions and being like, all right, well, let's see if that's actually true. Like, would parents let their kids do this program? I don't know. Let's actually run the program and see if parents will do, like just see if they'll do it. And people are like the market will tell you really quickly. And that's where I think some of these business principles play, like why I love social entrepreneurship, because it brings in principles that you actually have to act on. And then the second is becoming the expert at the problem in the world and like being someone who's really good at solving the problem, because then you're ahead of everyone else trying to solve it because your expertise is in the problem in itself or the opportunity. Um, yeah, so that's how I approached it too, of like because it was like years of working with storytelling and teens and kids, and it was like a huge thing everyone complained about. Is like I wish I just saw it was a passive comment, but when I kept writing down where they're like, oh, I wish I could just see how someone else did this, and it wasn't that someone else wasn't how a president got elected. It was like how a teen started a nonprofit with 10 people and like solved this like or doing this really cool thing. And so part of it, yeah, is like that kind of like market listening. Yeah. And then another question from is, are there any unique or surprising challenges you've encountered working with youth? Yeah, so I think young people, especially teens, are the most creative, fun, clever, silly, like full of potential, full of life people. It is so fun. I think the hardest part is not working with teens itself. It's working with the adults that surround them, who undermine them, who fill up their schedules, who overbook them, who put crazy pressure and expectations, which we've all felt, right? Like if you're connected to this university, if you're here right now, I assume you've at one time felt the pressure of getting into a top college, being number one, being the best in this field, getting a great career, making this thing. Like we've had all these like social pressures of the definition of success. Um, and I deal with that, like that type of market. Like I deal with like all of you, if you were in high school, you're my market, you're who I work with. And that's my biggest constraint is the other pressures both that are put on teens. And that's why I think change making and social entrepreneurship is so liberating because it gives you permission to fail. It gives you permission to get rejected. It gives you permission to try something that won't work. It gives you permission to like lean into a hobby, but like code it in a way that sounds cool that you could say for a college application, but like actually just giving you permission to build the thing, right? Like any teen I work with has an incredible story that we can tell on a college app that took us like an hour to write because they've spent a year building this amazing venture, and it just speaks to their character and who they are and what they're capable of. And we get the game that we're playing. And so that's been really surprising to me is like I thought working with teens in themselves was the hard part because of an age difference or like right keeping attention and like they don't like this and but in reality the hardest part is navigating the other pressures, challenges, and expectations set upon them. Um, and I think what's so unique is that they are not bogged down by bureaucracy. They are not like worried about permission. They don't really care about certain people. Like they care about their peers' opinions, but like the leader of that nonprofit that doesn't email them back or like the CEO that didn't message them on LinkedIn back, they're like, who cares? Like they're irrelevant to me. Like they just are pretty fearless. One of my challenges to students at the start of all of our programs is they have to reach out to people they want to talk to. So like influencers, professionals, CEOs, and some of the people teens have talked to are like, it's a crazy list of like A-list celebrities, like D1 athletes, people who are like top Heisman winner, like just people because who were like, yeah, like no one messages me asking for like a 15-minute conversation about who I am and what I do. I'd love to talk to you. And so to me, like that's what's so cool is they have this fearlessness that I think we lose a little when we get stuck in the bureaucracy of industries or universities or systems because we start seeing all the hierarchy and pressures and all that. And I think my biggest reminder every time I like, and why I love working with teens is they remind you of like, it's kind of fake. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, who cares if they don't message you back? Who cares if someone thinks that was a little cringy? Who cares if someone doesn't send you an email? Like, you just ask. Like, you let if you're kind. Like, who cares? So, those are my favorite parts. It's a fun group. Ashley, I see you have a question. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious how you gauge which people and or like groups or institutions, organizations you would like to work with or collaborate with, especially in environments where like your own values don't necessarily match up with the people who surround you. I feel like that is very frequently a problem for me. Like even just like on paper, I'll see like some characteristics that like make me really excited, and then you get to know the people who are like more familiar with these like organizations or like an individual, and they're just like actually they treat other people really poorly. And it makes me like very cautious about like engaging with other people, which I think can be a bit of a hindrance. Yeah. Yeah, that is a really, really helpful answer.
Yeah, of
Thank
course.
you.
Yeah.
We just have a few minutes left before this portion of the speaker series is over. So I'll ask us a concluding question, Riley, and then
Yeah.
we can move over to our alumni roundtable where you can speak directly with our folks who are part of that. But another key piece that came out to me from your story was you generated this really innovative solution, but it wasn't just limited to you. It expanded upon when that other individual kind of expanded the opportunity, translated it, started to sell it to schools and build it into their curriculum. So
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about how, doing that hyper specific local change, like also depends on a network you may have and how that network can kind of expand and build upon the solution that you've developed and how that may lead to the actual greater problem solving at a larger scale.
Yeah, totally. I think my biggest learning from that, because I'm always so jealous when I share R as part of the story. I'm like, God, she did the cooler thing. Like, yeah, sure, I have a million people who read a thing, blah, blah, blah. But like hers is in education systems. They've made so much, like they've self-funded it. It's so cool. And I was so jealous for the longest time. And she's a dear friend. I love her to death. Um, I think I realized though, from talking and reflecting with her on it, of like, my God, how cool it is to change the world with other people. Like how cool it is to find other people with other skills, other strengths, other energy who can take your ideas and run with it. Because I think that just gives you permission. Um, to realize like one, you're not going to solve every social issue. Two, you're not the hero in most people's story. Three, you're not the main character in most people's story. But you do have things to contribute and you are meaningful and you have a lot of value to give. But that value can only go so far in every direction. And I was really excited to move to the next thing. And she was really excited to double down and try it again in a different context. And so I think what I've really learned and like given myself permission and why I stepped away from a big international nonprofit to focus on a small social venture is I wanted to get really good at a few things and become the expert in those things. And people know me for those things and find other problems I could solve within that space versus trying to like build everything at an international scale, doing all this stuff versus like, I work with highly ambitious teens around the world who want to solve social problems. And that's already a lot of people. That's already a lot in itself. And so I have to like find my niche even further. Um, and I think that's like the ideas that like the things that scale are really motivating because you also have to realize they're going to scale without you. And things like if it only depends on you, it's never going to be scalable. It doesn't matter what it is. And so when you can give up permission for other people to take things on, I think that's when you realize like that's real innovation is like, oh, this other nonprofit stole your idea. Oh, this other venture like kind of took the thing you told them and created a camp about it. And you're like, damn, that was my idea. But you're like, you know what? Like, good. Like more of it exists in the world. More people are liking it. More people know that I'm like someone doing it. So, um, yeah, I don't know. That's something I'm still figuring out though. And I think that's like part of like being a civic leader is knowing like what your role is and what is your role to others and not being like selfish in that is kind of hard too. But yeah, I think that that's kind of something, especially with scale and innovation, is like where you have to find that I'm like fully now on that journey of trying to figure out.
Thank you, Riley. Sounds like the journey continues and will continue for the next, 10 plus years. I'm thinking about our civic identity as well. But I just wanted to, again, send our appreciation from the CCL for chatting and having the speaker series with us. And we're going to close it out and shift to our alumni roundtable folks. So for those of y'all on the alumni roundtable, just go ahead and hop on to that link. And then again, we recorded this conversation, so we'll send that out to those who participated here, and then we'll have that available through the different CCL channels as well. But thank you all.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all. Hope it was interesting. I'm still learning too, but follow me on LinkedIn, message me, chat. Love to stay connected. Thanks, y'all, so much.